This is a gravel bike, the Cervelo Aspero, and this is an endurance road bike, the Enve Fray. But which is best for you, for the riding you do? Well, today we will find out. Now, on the surface, both bikes look very similar, almost the same in fact, and we'll go through the differences in detail, the features, the geometry, and I'll share my experience of riding both bikes to help you understand the differences between the two bikes and which is right for you. Now, over the last few years, we've seen some amazing development and evolution of drop bar bikes, endurance bikes with bigger tire clearance, and gravel bikes being faster and more versatile than ever before. And there's lots of talk about one bike that can do it all, the N+1 Killer. And I get loads and loads of questions from you guys at home asking whether a gravel bike like this can be two bikes in one, with different wheels and tyres. So the question is a bike like this better value for money and a better bike for you than a bike like this? Well, today we'll try and answer that question as best we can. The first talking point is tyre clearance and the biggest point of difference between the two bikes. Now, the big trend in the drop bar world for the last few years has been ever wider tyres. Road race bikes up to 32, endurance bikes like the Fray here up to 40, and gravel bikes up to 45 and 50 and beyond. Now, the two bikes here offer up to 40mm tyre clearance with a 1x drivetrain, or 38 with 2x, a limitation of the front mech. And the new Cervelo Aspero is up to about 45, depending on how much clearance you want between the frame and fork. But how wide a tyre you need depends on the terrain you are riding and your ratio of road to off-road. If you're mostly riding road and a bit of off-road and some cobbles, then the tyre clearance on a bike like this might be just fine. And my experience of riding an endurance road bike with a gravel tyre fitted in the new Specialized Roubaix SL8, video linked above in case you missed it, shows a bike like this can do off-road pretty well indeed. And it's worth remembering that the tyre clearance on an endurance road bike is now bigger than early generation gravel bikes and bigger than CX bikes as well, and shows how much that category of bike has really evolved over the last few years. Gives us more options to fit the tyres we want for the riding we do. But if you want a bigger tyre clearance, the most versatile setting, then a gravel bike definitely wins this battle. Now, the geometry is where the differences get really interesting between the two bikes. The angles and numbers that determine the fit and how a bike rides. Now, both bikes here are good examples of their respective categories, but each bike in those categories does differ a lot. A Giant Defy is different to a Specialized Roubaix and different to a Trek Demani, and the same as a Cervelo Aspero to an Enve Mog and a Giant Revolt and so on. But these are two bikes I had for testing for the comparison. And a big difference right off the bat is the reach of both bikes. The Cervelo Aspero has a much longer reach, designed around a shorter stem to give faster, more responsive steering when riding off-road, while the Enve Fray has a shorter reach, designed around the longer stem that you typically run on a road bike. But the actual fit from the saddle to the handlebar hoods is pretty much the same. It's how they go about that reach that is different. Another big difference between the two bikes is the stack, the height of the front end of the bike and the handlebar position relative to the bottom bracket. So the Cervelo Aspero is actually a lot lower than the Fray here and quite racy, but nowhere near as slammed as a race bike like a Tarmac SL8. So you want a lower racy position, the Cervelo is a better option than the Fray here. But other endurance bikes do have a lower stack, like a Giant Defy for example. They're not all the same. Another key difference between the two bikes is the length of the wheelbase and the chainstays, which are shorter on the Fray than the Aspero, and also the fork trail is shorter here too, which gives more nimble, more agile, responsive handling, and the Cervelo is definitely more planted and stable at higher speeds. The fork trail on the Cervelo can be adjusted from shorter to longer to suit different wheel sizes and tyres you fit on that bike as well, where there's no adjustment here. But as we see the bikes here in the stock default setting, the Aspero has a slightly longer trail than the Fray. And both bikes have a fairly low 76mm bottom bracket drop, so you feel in the bike rather than on top of the bike as you do on a CX race bike. Okay, a quick break to let me tell you about today's sponsor, Squarespace. Using Squarespace to build a brand new website really couldn't be any easier. And it's now even simpler thanks to Blueprint, which uses AI to guide you through the process of building a totally personal website bespoke to your exact needs. Simply answer a few questions and hey presto, your online presence is generated from the ground up. You can then customize the website using a fluid engine drag and drop interface and change the styling just how you want it and add any number of tools you need to build a website for any purpose. From launching an online bike shop to sell cool bike products, starting a blog, sharing your photos, whatever your need, there's a Squarespace solution for you. And best of all, there's a free trial so you can find out for yourself just how good Squarespace really is using a link down below in the description. And if you enjoy it, there's 10% off your first purchase with the code on screen right now. Okay, on with today's video. Let's compare features between the two bikes. And you can see they both have top tube mounts for a bento box for extra food and gels when you're riding a long distance. Both bikes have a third bottle cage mount on the down tube. The Fray does get the extra benefit of fender or mudguard mounts, which this bike sadly doesn't. And the Fray also has down tube storage, which I think is really cool for riding a long distance. You don't have a saddlebag collecting all the mud, and all your essentials are packed away in a frame out of the elements and keep your jersey pockets free for more food and clothing. So, not the best example of a gravel bike when it comes to versatility, but does show some of the differences you can expect between a gravel bike and an endurance road bike. Right, let's see what each bike weighs on the scales. And yes, not a fair comparison, different components and so on, but lots of people think gravel bikes are heavy and slow compared to road bikes. So let's see what the difference actually is on my scales. Same size bikes, no pedals. 8.52 kilograms. Right, next up, the Enve Fray, which should, with Ultegra Di2, be a lighter build. I make that 7.98 kilograms, running up to 8 kilos. So about half a kilograms difference between the two bikes, mostly down to the group sets and the tyres. But 500 grams between friends, not a lot. Probably won't hold you back on the road, the trails or the climbs, but a bit of weight difference if you are weight weaning and that matters to you. But what about using the Aspero as a road bike? Well, here you go. Slick tyres on, let's see how it performs. But first, let me show you what I've done to the setup. So the wheels are straight off my giant TCR Zip 303S wheels with 28mm wide Futura Corsa Next tyres. It does look a bit odd with so much clearance around these skinny tyres. Look at that space there. Probably not very aero. And if the bike had fender mounts, you've got some nice mud guards in there. It'd be a lovely jubbly for winter riding. And swapping the wheels over was a breeze because I currently have an Explorer cassette from SRAM on my Giant, 1044 on the back, 160 rotors front and rear, and conveniently for this comparison, the same zip hubs on these wheels as on the reserve wheels on the Aspero. So swapping them over was a breeze. No need to adjust the disc brakes or the gear indexing. Very easy swap indeed. And yes, I know these are probably a bit narrow by today's standards, and maybe swapping the tyres over from the Fray would have been a fairer test, but that's time consuming and it's just a sort of basic test. I'm not going to super detail, so let's go for a spin, lunchtime loop, see how it performs. I'm riding at the same power and speed I always do, and it feels fine. It feels like a normal road bike. I don't feel disadvantaged at all. Don't feel slower or being held back. In fact, it's pretty damn quick. There probably are some small changes to geometry with the smaller tyres, lower bottom bracket, fork trail, but it doesn't feel like I ruined the handling of the bike. It just feels like a regular road bike, like an endurance road bike. And the stack being quite low, lower than a Fray, but not as low as a race bike, gives a nice sporty fit on the bike. And there's good reach to the hoods despite the shorter stem, thanks to a longer reach. So it feels very good indeed. So a very pleasant experience riding the Aspero as a road bike. And I can totally see this setup being more than adequate more than sufficient for a lot of people. If you're not racing and just riding for fun and enjoyment and want an easy life, and one bike is that easy life with 2 sets of wheels and tyres, then this could be it. Now it's worth adding that for the comparison, the Aspero is perhaps not the best example of a progressive gravel bike. Definitely more conservative in the angles and numbers and measurements, and it definitely leans towards that racier end of the gravel spectrum and makes a good candidate for a gravel slash all-road bike. There are gravel bikes I've tested that are much longer, slacker and lower, and don't feel quite as road bike-esque as this one does with slick tyres fitted, so worth bearing that in mind. And does make the Aspero a rather more appealing option if you want a one bike to do it all. I was underwhelmed by the changer to the new bike when I reviewed it the other day, link above in case you missed it. But as a gravel slash all-road bike, it makes a bit more sense. The geometry works as a road bike and it's still pretty decent when riding off-road. But as I mentioned before, not the most progressive when it comes to riding off-road. But if your riding on gravel is smooth and not technical or gnarly, and you are doing some road riding, then it could be a good offering. And one more key point of difference is in the price. And while this is definitely not an apples to apples comparison, it's worth knowing about. The new Aspero here with SRAM Rival AXA group set will cost you £5,200, while the Enve Fray here is £5,500 just for the frame set. Frame, fork, handlebar, stem and seat post. So let's wrap things up then. Which is the best bike for the riding you do? Well, in my experience, the Enve Fray, despite the high stack, is the superior, better road bike. It feels more lively, more engaging and sportier to ride on the road. Of course, the tyres do help, but the differences in the geometry also help as well. And you could fit a gravel tyre, a 38 or a 40, and if your gravel is dry and dusty and dirt roads, I'm sure the bike will be just fine. And then for gravel, well, the Cervelo Aspero is the better choice, as obvious as that sounds. The bigger tyres, the mud clearance around the tyres, and the longer reach, the shorter stem and the other geometry differences make this a better handling bike when riding actual gravel and actual off-road trails. Now, which is right for you? Well, it depends on your ratio of road to off-road. If you're doing 90% on the road and 10% off-road, and that off-road is dry and dusty, then I think the Enve Fray is a better bike. It's a better road bike than a Cervelo Aspero. But if your ratio is more 50-50 or 70-30 to off-road versus road, and you want to ride more chunky off-road trails and have space for bigger tyres, then the gravel bike here, the Aspero, is a more natural choice, a better choice for riding off-road, and won't slow you down with some slick tyres fitted on the road. So if you really want one bike to do it all, road and off-road, and not slow you down in either situation, then the Cervelo Aspero or a gravel bike like this is a better choice and therefore better value for money. But if you're mainly riding on the road, then the Enve Fray is still a better choice, and space for a 40mm wide tyre is probably enough for many people watching this video. So two very similar bikes, some key differences in the details of them, although on the surface they look very similar. And which is right for you ultimately comes down to how much riding you do on the road versus off-road and where your real focus lies. But hopefully I'll shed some light on the differences between the two bikes, as endurance all-road bikes definitely move towards gravel bikes, and gravel bikes like this are just as racy as a bike like this. And for some people, the choice is fantastic, and for some people, it's too much choice. Anyway, hopefully this video has helped shed some light on the differences between an endurance road bike and a gravel bike, and which is right for you. And of course, let me know your thoughts on this topic, these two bikes, by leaving a comment down below. And if you want to see a review on the bike, an in-depth review, then watch the video right up here. And of course, don't forget to subscribe by hitting the button right here. But that's all for now. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again very soon.